I work in Lesotho. Okay, my name is Ian Membe, and I work in Lesotho with the United States Agency for International Development, which is USAID, where I'm the Deputy Country Director there. And I've been working in Lesotho for the last 8 years, and working in the public health sector for a long time, and in the development sector for a very long time. I'll be able to share some of my experiences as we discuss, so you get some ideas of what I've been doing during that time. All right, I want to hear from a few people here. I see, let's see, Jacqueline Peary. Let's hear where you're coming from.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. My name's Jacqueline Peary Chipuma. I'm a Chief Productivity Measurement Officer under the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, just here in Lusaka. I work for a department called National Productivity Development Department. Thank you.
Excellent. I want to be in that department. All right.
You're welcome.
Joseph. Joseph Simuchimba.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope it's afternoon everywhere. Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'm Joseph Simchimba. On Facebook, I'm Sungwe Joe. Yeah. I work for Ministry of Health. I'm the Principal Monitoring and Evaluation Officer in charge of performance monitoring. Yeah, my work surrounds the production of annual statistical report, M&D frameworks for various programs. So it's very a good platform for me to be here, and I hope I'll add on to the knowledge that is going to be given out. And good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too. Yes, I would not have recognized you from your name because sometimes we interact in different places with different names. I see Mr. Thomas Moyo. I'm not sure if it's the same Thomas Moyo I know. Would you like to just say hello, introduce yourself and what you've been up to? Okay. So I see maybe he's still muted or still joining. All right. Once we get to 20 people, we get started. So let's hope that 2 people come in a few minutes. While people are still coming in, I will start with what we've covered so far, just to catch up everybody else. So we've been discussing for these last 2 days. We've been talking about developmental frameworks or development frameworks. And yesterday we took quite a bit of time to just explain the concept of frameworks and what frameworks look like, how we set them up, how we identify. Really, the whole idea was to ensure that people are able to tell. You will hear different things, and people will use different kinds of languages for these things. But your ability to understand what's going on will help you to be able to contribute, be able to add to the agenda. For example, a lot of people come with different titles. They are monitoring and evaluation specialists. They're strategic information advisors. They're MERL and learning specialists, and all of this. All of this is just different language, but the actual work that you end up doing is the same. Every organization will expect you to do the same kind of things. Yesterday, we touched on the different frameworks. We talked about conceptual frameworks. We talked about logical frameworks. We talked about strategic frameworks. And what we're emphasizing really is that whether you're doing it at a ministerial level, like Mr. Sungwe there, you're doing it at ministerial level, you're doing it at a community program, you're doing it in an NGO, you're doing it at an international level, and you're doing a framework at that level. the processes that you go through are pretty much the same. First of all, you start with a conceptual framework that helps you understand what is it that we are dealing with. What are the causes? What are the causes? What are the effects? Or what are the problems? What are the solutions? So you have a conceptual framework that defines the problem. In research work, if you're doing a master's program or your PhD program, we call it the research framework. You're basically defining what the issue is. And then from there, you design, because now from a programmatic point of view, you want to design a vehicle that will be a solution to solve that problem that will lead you to some results. So then you design either a logical framework, which has everything in one place. You can look at everything in one picture, including your inputs, your indicators, everything is there, which is really appropriate for smaller programs. And you can see everything in one place, especially, you're dealing with, I gave an example, if it's, in agricultural sector, you're just dealing with a fertilizer program, okay? And you can see everything in one place. So you do a log frame that translates your conceptual framework into an actionable program that can be implemented. Because if somebody picks up a log frame, just one piece of paper, you should be able to say, this is exactly what this program does. This is exactly what this program is going to expect to achieve. And then we talked about a results framework, which is now a way to translate your conceptual framework now into how you're going to achieve these results. And this works best where you have multiple components. So you might have, it's not just, it might be in the agricultural sector, it's not just fertilizer distribution, you also have livelihoods, you also have seed production, you also have animal husbandry. And so because of the expertise, the technical expertise that is required for all the different fields, it will be very hard, very difficult for you to fit it all into a log frame. And if you do it that way, it means that now you will have to set up a separate tool. And so we talked about your indicator worksheets. And that's where now you will put all your indicators. So you will have your framework there that will have all different components. Usually the components also define how the organization looks like. In short, it defines your organogram. Right at the beginning, I talked about the fact that, if you work in M&E, you become a very strong person because you can talk about the whole program. You understand how the whole program works. And so you're able to define all of that. And then once you get your results framework done, then you have your indicator worksheets, your reference sheets, and that's where you have your definition, your numerators, denominators, frequency of collection, and all of that. Then you take all of that, translate it into a tool for how you collect your data, you analyze it, you report it, and share with stakeholders, etc. So that was 3 hours of yesterday, and then we had just started with actually maybe two, a little bit like 2 hours and some minutes. And then we had just started with talking about planning development, understanding development frameworks and planning development frameworks. So I'll do a little bit of that part 2 today, and then we'll go into some more of the planning of development frameworks. I hope that, we'll get some discussions and hear back from people in terms of their own experiences. But if you have questions on anything that we discussed yesterday all the way to today, we're happy to take all of those. In principle, we had said you can put your comments into the chat. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. But as I am going, if you have a question midway, just feel free to lift your hands. I'll be able to see that. The Secretariat can also help, to monitor the chats. If there are any questions, just ping me and I should be able to stop and we can go to that. All right, so let's go back to understanding international development frameworks. I had just gone through the definition yesterday when we had the power glitch, but we kind of managed to summarize. So I'll just go back to the definition and then we'll pick up from there. So when we talk about international development frameworks, we are really talking about plans that happen at the international level. And these are frameworks that are structured in a way that you can see these global goals, these global strategies. We gave a lot of examples. And in today's sessions, we'll touch even further into how we get these plans to be, integrated into our local national development plans and all of that. But what you tend to see that differentiates them at that international level is that they're usually very comprehensive in scope. In my current work, working at USAID here in Lesotho, I find that, and actually the kind of work that I've been doing for the last, maybe more than 15 years, has mostly in this area where you're dealing with issues that are comprehensive in scope. They encompass a very wide range of issues. So if you're working with UNICEF, for example, it's a very wide range area of education-related issues. You very area of child, mother, health issues. If you're at UNICEF, UNESCO will be education-related issues at very different levels. In my area, it's healthcare, and it has to be global. It has to be at very different levels. So in the definition, we are touched on the fact that the guidelines tend to be very normative. They are very standardized, and so they have to be reviewed so many times because you have to be able to apply them everywhere, including on the moon, if you will. If we had people staying on the moon, if Elon Musk manages to take people to Mars, these kinds of guidelines would have to apply for health systems on Mars as well. Okay. Just as a side thought on this Mars thing, I just sometimes go into these side thoughts to keep people awake. I like what Neil deGrasse Tyson, some of you might know him as a scientist who talks about, space and all of this. And he makes a very good point. And that point applies to some of the work that we do, that especially for those of you who work in climate and things. We have a 6-year window in which we need to fix the Earth before some countries start getting into very dire challenges with climate. In the last 2 weeks, we've been seeing climate going into up to like 30 degrees, 35 degrees in some places. I haven't been to Lusaka, and I have avoided coming to Lusaka this year because I can see how high the temperatures have been soaring. I'm in Lesotho, which is one of the coolest countries in the hemisphere, but we've been getting snow all the way up to like 3 weeks ago. We were still getting snow up in the mountains. So really emphasizing climate change and some of the things that you start to learn. So we've got about 6 years before we get to this 35-degree high. Some countries would become untenable if you stay there for like, more than a week, 2 weeks. It becomes untenable to stay in those kinds of climates. So Neil deGrasse Tyson makes a very excellent point about the amount of money it would cost us to adapt Mars for human habitation will be so much more than it would cost us to just make Earth habitable, to plant more trees. The amount of money it would cost to put people on the moon, it would be way, way cheaper to just do those kinds of things right here on Earth and get everybody have enough food, have enough, so we're not destroying the climate. So for environmental sustainability. But, it's a side thought, but actually it's a real thought in terms of some of the decisions that we make at a very global level when we are developing these frameworks for what leads to what and what leads to solutions. In this case, that's with the environment. All right. So related to that is adaptability, meaning that this framework should be able to be adapted at country level. So that's what we are always doing. Not every country implements the same things. For example, with PEPFAR, we have global goals that we go with. I've touched on these, 95, 95, 95. But each country is at different stages. So each country will have their M&E people look at their data and say, you know, for us, we need to do things a little differently because we are already at this point. We are already at this point. In some cases, we'll look at our data and say, you know, our data is not great. When I first came to Lesotho and I looked at our results, and I went to several health facilities, and the first thing that shocks you, having come from Zambia and I'd worked in a lot of health facilities, is how nice the health facilities they all looked. The smaller in the rural areas, you go in the toilets, clean, white, everything. Everybody's got water and everything, and they had a huge project with the Millennium Challenge Corporation that just built and refurbished all the health facilities. You know, those are models that any country can do on their own. They just need to invest the money in those right places. And with just a few focused funds in a particular sector. And so you learn from that, from those kinds of things, for things that we can adapt and do, even at country level and in different countries. Yeah. And first, when I got here and learned about what we are doing in the country, and I looked at our indicators for the HIV program, it didn't align in my head from what I was seeing at site and what I was seeing in our numbers. We were like 30% coverage for people on treatment. So I'd say, no, this doesn't make sense. How can we be 30% coverage? When you go to every health facility, you ask how many people born positive here, the kids have said it, nobody in the last 1 year. Maybe there was one child, but that was like 2, 3 years ago. It didn't make sense. So as the M&E advisor, I started to look at the data and I started to understand, to look at, you know, how the data looked like and were the challenge, why were we so low and why wasn't this program working? And, you know, it didn't make sense. And we found that some of the issues just had to do with how the denominators were being calculated. I looked at Eswatini and see Eswatini was already at 70%. How is that possible? We are at 38%, they're at 70%. So we started to figure out some things. And as we did the public health, what we call them FIAs, public health, I'm forgetting the I, the A is for assessment. I'm sure it will come. As we did the FIAs, which is the studies that establish the basic numbers, you know, for incidents and other areas, we started to figure out that these indicators have to do with some of the denominators. Some of the denominators were not looking great. Just give me 1 second. I have a knock on the door. Let me just see. Hello. Oh, okay. All right.
Tomorrow morning, I think, is the one that's worrying me. It's from 5 until 9. What time are you wanting to leave?
We should be out maybe by 5 or 6.
In the morning?
In the morning. We are very good.
Okay, so would you like us to switch the generator on so that you can shower?
Yes.
What time would you like that?
So I think by 6 is okay.
Now, if we put the generator on at 6.
That's fine.
Okay. Do you want to leave before that?
No, we should be on 6 will be okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Sorry.
No problem. So sorry about that. I had given for those who were here yesterday. So I've traveled. I'm actually in a place called Grahamstown in South Africa, just next to the Rhodes University here. I was doing some errand and then take off tomorrow. And so in South Africa, load shedding is still a big challenge. So kudos to Zambia for all the work that's been done to clear the load shedding. So anyway, let's continue. So I was talking about the data and how we adapt to the country level. And so what we had to do in our case, so when I looked at the system and I looked at the data, and what we realized was in a country like Lesotho, we have quite a number of people who who live and work in South Africa, who are counted in the census. So the census will have a huge denominator of people. And then when you come to the actual program, the people who actually end up going to the health facility here are much fewer than the ones who are counted in the census. So if you do your indicator definitions and the denominators that you're using are including everybody for a country that is very transitory, like ours here in Lesotho, your denominators will be so big. And so you're struggling to meet your targets, and yet the people that you're trying to meet the targets are not actually there. They're always counted in the census, but they don't live in the country. It's not the same in Zambia. Not a lot of people live in, live outside the country. Most people stay there. And so, so that's the adaptability bit, is that you have to think through your program and say, this is why. These are some of the decisions that we make, even though you're using a very global developmental framework. All right, M&E, obviously, every developmental framework has to have monitoring and evaluation aspects. It's the only way you're going to be able to ensure that you show accountability, you show impact, you say what your money came to do. Another, I think, very key aspect with developmental frameworks or development frameworks is that they tend to be very long-term. So you have from 20, usually have 5-year, 10-year goals. Millennium Development Goals were long-term goals. SDGs, long-term goals. If you look at PEPFAR, if you look at all of this, usually they are very long-term goals. So those are some of the aspects that you see when you're thinking about developmental frameworks. Yesterday in our discussion, I had started by talking about some of the aspects relating to where we are coming from and how we got here. So I wanted to just kind of share some of those aspects. A lot of people these days, and one of the main reasons why I touch on this is that because there's obviously been some fatigue, donor fatigue, there's Western fatigue, aid fatigue, and people like Dambisa Moyo have written excellent books about dead aid. People who are working in aid programs just in it for the money, and nothing has changed. There is a genuine frustration in Africa, and especially in African countries and other countries that have been receiving aid over a long time, for the lack of change going from one, to the next. And so those aspects also need to be addressed. And I think they will shape the way development frameworks will look like in the future, to say, if what we're doing is not making a difference, then what should we be doing? Oh, we just see these differences in the short term, and then we are back to the same thing. I think I can speak for the PEPFAR program in that, and I said this yesterday, there's no doubt in my mind, there's no doubt that what we've been doing for the last 20 years has made a huge difference in saving lives. You can sit down and you can count and say, if we had not done what we have done with PEPFAR in the last 20 years, X number of people would not be alive today. Every family lost somebody in the 90s, coming into the 2000s. Every family was losing somebody close to you, sister, brother, cousin, uncle, due to HIV. And if we had not done what we have done starting from 2005 in most countries, that trend would have continued for the longest time. But I like to go back to the history to say, where did we come from? Actually, it's not just Africa that has received aid or that has had to use developmental frameworks. This is a global thing. So I like to go back to the beginning of CARE, CARE International. CARE was, now let's see if I can remember the acronym. It was, the last part is Relief to Europe. Canadian aid or relief to Europe. I'm definite about the last part, is that it was established as relief aid to Europe, after the world wars, because there's so many children who are being left with nothing. People, amputees, all the devastation, and they got to receive aid. In short, at any one point in the world, there are places where there's the need for emergency relief. There's the need for emergency support. We've just had Russia and Ukraine go through a war, but now we have Hamas and Israel going at it. And you've seen the horrific pictures and children struggling with different things. I think the difference with Africa is we've been in some of these states for way too long. And so I think it behooves us as countries to establish resilience measures so we can get out of these quickly enough, so we don't have to stay in this very prolonged. Because, I mean, look at countries like Congo being in a certain situation for so long. I think the UN forces just left, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? There are bound to be a lot of problems, them staying there for such long times. But this historical perspective just helps us to see that this just didn't happen. Humanitarian aid has been happening pre-20th century. There wasn't much coordination back then. But as countries went through the world wars, a lot of countries start to participate, and we see some of the global impacts of this. We start seeing organizations like the UN, and then a lot more documentation on development at a global level. We start to see the UN bringing all these organizations together. But then we start to see also a shift to country-led programs. The US has programs, Japan has programs, the Germans have something. And then now we are, I think, then we get to the MDG stage and all of that, SDGs. Now I think for Africans, we are seeing now a rise of African organizations coming from the AU. We saw it with the COVID pandemic, where we have organizations from within Africa. And now the man who was leading the African body responding to the COVID pandemic is now leading the PEPFAR as an organization. Well, leading PEPFAR and now in what is called the Global Health, Security and Diplomacy, GHSD, for the United States government. So now we are beginning to see a lot of those bodies beginning to shift, and I think they start to define what the future will start to look like. I think we'll see more and more of more local, even more regional bodies start to respond and work with international bodies. And so you see post-World War II, we had the UN formed. We had around the 2000s when we started talking about the millennium and what goals should be met. Some of them were met, some of them were still not met. The transition to sustainable development goals, SDGs. And like I've talked about, there are a lot of issues that are happening now. Recessions that are happening in the West also will start to put pressure on both taxpayers in those countries. Will start to say, if I haven't eaten, I'm struggling here, my government should look after me first. That will affect how much money they're able to send and support other countries. African countries that are saying, well, we've been receiving aid for so long, it looks like we're not benefiting from it. In fact, it looks like you're taking more than you're giving us. Those ideas, those will start to shape what the future starts to look like. We are just talking and discussing environmental crisis and global pandemics that we've just gone through. They've helped us to see, how well are we able to respond? How quickly can we respond? What should we be thinking about going into the future with having our own labs, having our own places where we can support countries regionally, with different strategies. So all of those shape where we're going. We've had different kinds of historical frameworks, and usually they're usually named around the countries, where they were established. Most people remember something called the Beijing Platform for Action, because that's where a lot of the gender gender equality and women empowerment movement came out of. It was from the Beijing platform. And a lot of funding for those, you still feel them up to today. That's where they came from. And we've had others apart from MDGs, other world summits on sustainable development, etc. All of those have happened. And they are very critical in that you will still see them in the national development plans. So if you go back to a national development plan now and you read it, you realize that, oh, some of the stuff in here, this is where they came from. They came from the Monterey consensus. They came from the Montreal Protocol. They came from the Beijing Declaration. And we're still using some of these. You read some of the education strategic plan, Ministry of Education strategic plans, and you still see that some of these are still there. Some of the key principles I've touched on some, but let's see if we can define them. Sustainability is a big one these days. This is where we are always saying what you are doing. If a donor does something, if a framework is implementing something in a country, how is the country, the host country, going to be able to sustain that? How is the host country going to be able to take that into the future? So you see, it's gone dark a little because the power just gone. How will we be able to implement it? So sustainability is different things. There's sustainability of the effort itself, meaning, are we going to continue to do the same things? All right, so let's say you're driving a car and you switch it off, you take all the money out, does the car continue to move? Do they continue to put in fuel so that it continues to move? But there's also sustainability of the results themselves, meaning, and so that's why this has become such a big thing now. Sustainability of the results. Let's say there's funding and it helps so many girls go through school. How does that become a sustainable into the future, that the results are still being felt 10 years from now, 20 years from now, without needing any other support? Okay. Inclusivity, we touched on that. This just means all the different sectors of society have to be looked at. Human rights has become a big thing and a very contentious thing because on the sidelines of this, what you call the letters, the LGBTQ issue has also been rising on the side of this, and then everything else has become such a challenge now. So every country now, especially the African countries, are very careful now when they talk about human rights. But the dignity of every individual, irrespective of nationality, ethnicity, religion, is still valid. And that applies across the country. So meaning that everything that we are doing development-wise, whether locally or internationally, has to uphold the inherent dignity and equal rights of all individuals. And in different countries, it's different things. You've heard of a lady, she's no longer a young lady, called Malala, who was shot by the Taliban and became very prominent, and has been a very vocal voice in the human rights space, because in those regions, some of the things that you don't even hear about in some of our countries, like girls not being allowed to go to school, they can't practice as doctors, women cannot travel on their own, things like that are still an issue. Yeah, I know that sometimes when people hear human rights, they only think of one thing. But it's just in general that all of these have to protect human rights at the end of the day, whatever development frameworks that we are thinking about. Equity, you've seen that example of equity, the difference between equity and equality. Equity means that there's fairness and there's justice in the distribution of resources. Equality means everybody gets the same things. Okay, equity means everybody is brought up to a good place. Because if you just give everybody else the same things, there are people who cannot just run that fast. Okay, which means you're going to leave them behind. In the education sector, not everybody has the same acumen. You need to help everybody get to a certain point. And so things like removing subsidies or removing fees in primary school, those ensure equity, ensure fairness. Okay. Another important aspect is partnership and collaboration. You will see it in a lot of the documents that you will read, issues around resilience, meaning that you're not just doing stuff, you're ensuring that the communities where you're working are much better after you are done with any program that you do. Okay. Areas around, especially when you're working from an international level, you would look at cultural sensitivity issues and the differences in different tailoring your programming to the different countries and ensuring each country's, cultural sensitivity, accountability and transparency are obvious. Now let's talk a little bit about who gets to participate. Every year when we are designing in my program, what we do is we have the global goals, and then every year we do something called a country operational plan. So every year we do a very big meeting. A friend of mine laughs at me and says, "Oh, you guys work so hard." And it's true, we work really hard. And they like, we do a 5-year plan and we are good. You guys are still doing every day. Every year we do for about 2.5 months or 3 months, actually 2.5 months. We don't travel, we don't take leave unnecessarily. You have to sit down and plan for the next year. And we plan like 1 year up ahead. And we call all the government stakeholders. Sometimes we do a global meeting in Johannesburg. Everybody comes to the same place, from different countries. And each country brings in their ministry counterparts. We invite other stakeholders from the UN, from the different places, come together. And then we sit down and then we make a plan. Okay. We make a plan and say, what is it that we're going to do in the next 1 year? And what difference is it going to make? Okay. Then we transfer those plans and say, which organizations are we going to fund? And we go through all of that. For those of you who might be new to this area, we make a differentiation between what we call multilateral organizations. And so these are your UNs, your World Banks and others, your global funds. And then we also make a difference between that and what we call bilateral organizations. So your bilaterals are the ones that come from countries. So bilateral is agreements between countries. Multilateral are agreements between international organizations and countries. And so your bilaterals are your JICAs, your USAIDs, because it's another government working with another government. And the way you work with those are different from the way you work with the multilaterals. And so you bring them together and have discussions, about what it is that you're going to implement. We also go with quite a number of non-governmental organizations to these planning meetings. We always go with some community organizations. They'll have their own separate meetings. They'll make their own presentations. They'll come in and say, this is what is important for us. If you don't do A, B, C, D, then it doesn't work for us. So there's just some examples across different sectors. I worked first initially with Care International that I talked about earlier on. But in my sector, we have, other organizations. Other sectors will have different organizations that you might end up working with. So all of those are included. Now we have a big push to fund local non-governmental organizations. So we are doing quite a bit to train them, build their capacity. And when we put out bids, we ensure that those bids are only for local organizations to apply. And in some of the local organizations that we've been funding, some of the things we've been doing to ensure that local capacity is built is reduce the number of international staff in those. At least the leadership should be local, and some of them even the international staff. There's still a few of us, who are international staff, but the numbers have really reduced. In fact, the last I checked, there's only like two what we call third country nationals. So there's from Zambia. There's only like two of us. I think another one is in Uganda, and I'm here in Lesotho. 4 or 5 years ago, there were like 4 or 5 of us. There was one in Malawi, there were 3 here, there was one in South Africa, so you can see the localization agenda is also moving very fast. There's only about, across the whole world, there's less than 100 third country nationals who are like mostly from within Africa who work in different countries. So you can see how that's changing quite rapidly. Sorry for those who want to work internationally, but if you want to, there's still a lot of international opportunities in other places and in other sectors, and you can work at different levels as well. But I'm talking about specifically for USAID because of the local and localization agenda and working through local partners. Yeah, even though it's been a great experience for me to work at this level and to learn the things that I've learned, but also to contribute, at this level. So, and I can understand where that future is going. Yeah, I'm not saying there are no more international positions for people who are aspiring to do that. There's still a lot, and there's still many areas you can work. Just check LinkedIn. There are still plenty. But you can understand where that's going. There are other stakeholders that sometimes, some of them, we have specific things that we work with. So every time we're doing our planning meetings, we always ensure that we go with civil society organizations and community-based organizations and representatives from local communities. And we kind of try to make this difference between civil society organizations and local NGOs. Local NGOs are the ones that are receiving funding from us, from like, the bilateral, multilateral organizations through whatever framework you might be thinking about. But civil society organizations are more like a voice. But, there are some gray areas. Some of the civil society organizations also receive funding, and then they're also implementing and all of that. Almost always we have advocacy groups join us, but we also like to get local communities. In a lot of our planning and our implementing, I'll give an example. We have some huge awards that we are planning for. We have 3 that we are currently planning. A huge treatment program will be about $10-12 million a year. A huge adolescent girls and young women, it's a dreams program. It's always been around $14 million a year. And as we are planning those, we do something called co-creation, where we bring everybody together and everybody can help design the next program. So for the adolescent girls and young women one, we will have people come in, young people come in and say, this is what's working, this is what's not working, this is what we really want to see. And it's our funding, we get to decide where those funds can have the best bang for the buck. And so it always helps to have those voices from the local communities to participate. So that's why we get different actors and different stakeholders to participate. We don't leave out the academic and research institutions, and we also get to work with other international financial institutions. But I think in Zambia, we've done quite a bit of good work with academic and research institutions. We've always done such a great job with working with the University of Zambia. And now that there are so many other universities, there's lots other opportunities to work with other research institutions. So many of you know about the M&E Center of Excellence. So we've been doing this for a long time. Back in around 2006, I think, when we started to teach and give these classes at the University of Zambia, and we used to walk around and go to all these different places would be teaching from the School of Vets. The next day you are in School of Mining, teaching M&E and teaching indicators and things like that. And it was always my passion to see that we establish something that could engender the training and developing the next generation of M&E practitioners. And so I think, I can't remember the year, but we were able to raise some money, around $6 million. And, you know, we went through every hoop. People would tell me, no, you cannot build, you cannot construct. I said, we're going to do this. And we ended up establishing that Center of Excellence. We built a lecture theater larger than at the time, it was the largest lecture theater, larger than the NELT, at the University of Zambia, with a Center of Excellence, with a computer lab, offices for staff. I've never actually been inside the buildings. But we did that, you know, through a great collaboration with the University of Staff, and with that department. And they've trained so many people, and the linkages with, you know, the work that we do at Zamia and all of that, and helps to improve and build quality. But we continue to work with institutions like that. In Lesotho, we are currently working on what we call activity-based costing and management, ABCM. And we hope that we will work with the National University of Lesotho here to be able to do some of that work for activity-based costing. So we are always incorporating and working with different stakeholders, even though we start from a larger framework. Okay. So those of you who missed yesterday, we established the background of how these frameworks, and now I'm talking about how we actually get to implement them, how it works like in practice. And that's how these tend to happen. Okay. I already talked about bilateral and multilateral organizations, so I'll skip this slide. But specifically with like the UN agencies, because there are so many of them and they cover every sector, I thought I'll just highlight. You have places like UNDP, which go across, you know, poverty reduction, capacity building, sustainable development. They are the ones who hold the SDGs, and then they work through the others like UNICEF, WHO, UNESCO, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many of them. But primarily in my office, I'm always on the call. Just this, not even 2 days ago, 3 days ago, we were with WHO. Now we have, for the Global Vax, we have Gavi, the Global Vax Initiative. I had a meeting with them like the day I was coming. Yeah, so we're always now implementing with all of these stakeholders, discussing and agreeing and ensuring all the systems are in place, and that we're doing the right things, working with the different countries, you know, across the board. And then we were working with the ministries. We were handing over some oxygen tanks 3 days ago, you know, to the Ministry of Health. And it's a huge infrastructure to ensure that in future, when pandemics happen, we don't have to run around chasing Afrox looking for oxygen, because a lot of people were dying just because we didn't have oxygen. Okay, so this is how it works in practice now, once you get all these frameworks. All right, in summary, contemporary frameworks such as the SDGs, they tend to be very all-encompassing, and they tend to be quite global. And I'll summarize here, and then we'll take a little break, and then we can come back. So in summary, they tend to be all-encompassing, and they'll cover different themes, from poverty alleviation, gender equality, education, climate. Yesterday, we had somebody from water and sanitation, economic growth. Now, affordable and clean energy is a big thing. And we tend to look at all of these frameworks and see how we can implement them kind of at country level. So I covered all of these in terms of how wide, inclusive they tend to be. As we kind of conclude this session, here are some examples, because a lot of times people think, oh, and it is true, we've got NGOs running left, right, and center. Sometimes we have meetings where we are just talking about, can we map who's doing what where? And I'm kind of like tired of just going through these meetings of who's doing what where, and we spend so much energy on just because I think there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of money, and we don't put it in the right places. And it's incumbent on the government through their national development plans to ensure that they're able to take these resources to where they need to be. Let me just do a check. Can people still hear me okay? Because I had some feedback. People hear me okay?
Yeah,
Oh,
clear.
all right. So, so we have this challenge where, so in my view, I've been worked in this sector for such a long time. There is enough resources for us to be able to have significant impact. So in my office, and as I work, especially as an African, I'm not local to Lesotho, obviously, but the same thing I used to tell in Zambia, and partly that's why we established that Center of Excellence. You can come back 10 years from now, and that center will be supporting people. It will be doing stuff. I know they rent it out sometimes for vivas and things like that. But in terms of building capacity for M&E, it's going to be doing that for a long time. There's sustainability there. I'm always talking to the local staff. When you work here, if you work at USAID, you work at Global Fund, you work at WHO, don't just do it just to get a paycheck. Don't just do it because it pays you well. These jobs do pay well. Don't just do it for that sake. Always think about, when I'm done with my work here, what will I have contributed to my country? It's a lot of money that we are using to implement. Think strategically and say, what is it that will make the most difference, that will have the largest impact in my country, that will help other people? Like I say, I've never even been in that lecture theater. They would be surprised to hear that I've never been in there. It's not because I don't think it's important, but because I don't think it's important that um, I think the most important thing is that it does contribute, and it does support, and it does help, and it improves the work of M&E in the country. For me, that's the gratification when I get the emails. We do have an award that I support with that Center of Excellence at the University of Zambia every year. And that just for me to be able to help and to keep connected and to help and support. One thing I've been trying to add, and we haven't perfected it yet, is we don't just give that award. I also do, for the person who gets the award, I do a session with them, or a couple of sessions with them, where I talk to them, about M&E. I didn't do it for the first, I think, 2 or 3 years, but the last person who got it, and I think the previous one, I had a session with them where I talked to them about, some of the stuff we're discussing today. What is M&E, where we're going, and see if they have any questions. So some mentoring sessions. I didn't fully do it with this last one, but what I want to do is add 2 other people so they can talk to 2 more people and get some mentoring. So it's not just an award I give them, and there's some money, that we put in, and that's good also. But really, it's for building the next generation of M&E practitioners. That's what we are trying to do, and with that work there. So my point is, what I was saying is, it's not NGOs haven't just been running around and doing nothing and not achieving anything. There have been some good examples of some successful implementations that we can learn from, and they can build on top of. In short, aid hasn't been just completely dead. There's a lot of dead places, a lot of things that we can improve on, but there's a lot of things that have been great. I will not highlight everything. You can see this in your slides. But there's been a lot that has happened in education, in improving the quality of education and standardizing the quality of education. There's been a lot that has happened with community-led initiatives. There are some, like, for example, In the health sector, we have community health workers, the training of community health workers. In some communities, health workers receive medication and give to people medication right where they live, things that wouldn't have happened if these initiatives had not happened. We have great examples. I gave an example yesterday of the water and sanitation program by UNICEF. And most of you now, you build your homes, you have a little thing in the corner when you build your home, right? Where you wash your hands. And what do you call it? Dishwashing, right? When you're about to eat, people say, oh, let's do dishwashing. Why? Because there was a global framework. There was a program at the global level that then got dissipated into the countries. And it's become entrenched in our culture. It has changed our behavior. Even when we are washing hands, we pour water. We don't know washing the same thing. We pour water. Why? Because there's been a great program that has worked. Here, there's something called keyhole gardens, where people are able to grow crops in like in a little lifted garden, and that helps with food, etc. Because there's lots of places where there are no trees and they're not able to grow crops very well, and so being able to help at that level. And obviously, where I work, I wouldn't be working in PEPFAR for this long if it wasn't such a successful program in saving people's lives every single day. Microfinance is a big thing everywhere you look. Agricultural practices that have come out of the SDGs, agroecology projects for biodiversity and things like that. Obviously, the gender programs have been huge. I did touch on yesterday the fact that now when you look at the levels of education amongst girls, in secondary school, girls are higher now than boys. In tertiary education, it's even getting worse. The gap between the boys and the girls is growing much larger every single year. So maybe now we need to switch the equity, switch to the other side and see. All sorts of things that I could talk about in terms of real world examples for where we are at. All right, we'll take a short break like we did yesterday. So maybe we'll take a 15-minute break, come back at 15:45, do some bio break, and then we will have a little bit of discussion, some question and answer, and then we'll continue on to the planning of international development frameworks, other aspects of planning international development frameworks. All right. How about that? So back to you, Secretariat. While we are on break, people can put in their questions in the chat and things like that. Okay, so let's see each other back at 15:45.
Good afternoon. Please feel free to type in any questions you might have in the chat, or you can hold on to them and you can ask them when we come back after our 15 minutes break. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back. Okay. I know a few people dropped off to go on the break, but hopefully they'll be back, and anybody else who's here. All right, so want to take the next 15 minutes or so to just get some questions, and could be about what we're discussing here today, or if you have any questions specifically to your program, to the work that you're doing. You came here with a burning question about something else that's M&E related, that's also okay. But I want to hear some feedback also on developmental frameworks, international developmental frameworks, and how they work, you know, how that applies to you. Maybe it's something that you're already doing and working on. I want to hear any additions, you know, to the class. Who knows, we might identify you as somebody to teach the next class. All right. So any questions, comments, you can put your hand up. We shall see it. Or you can type in the comments. So I see Raphael Chikwampu. Mr. Raphael.
Yes, yeah, and good afternoon, colleagues. I pray you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you again for the presentation. Sorry, I joined a little bit late. You may bear with me just in case I'm speaking at variance. Yeah, just two quick points. Huh? Yeah, so one is to do with sustainability of these interventions. You know, from my experience working in the NGO world, I think it's something that we haven't given the due attention. It's like we treat it as a by the way thing. You know, we do a lot of work and then we just exit like that. No exit strategy, you know, no regard to sustainability issues. No, we don't leave the key stakeholders with the requisite capacities to carry on. We are talking about community members themselves. We are talking about the traditional leaders, the local government. So I've seen this from many projects I've participated personally. You know, it's like, especially the leadership, don't appreciate that aspect. You as the project team may endeavor, you know, to explain, to emphasize, to lobby, but to no avail. You know, so to me that's a very serious concern. So I don't know what is happening, you know, elsewhere in terms of addressing that aspect, but in the case of Zambia, it's a very serious concern and a very serious gap. Sustainability. We treat it as a by the way thing. You know, we don't give it the attention that it deserves. We are not intentional, in other words. So that's my first point. The second one is just to agree with you on the aspect of rather to zero in on the aspect of collaboration. Again, that's another gap that I'm seeing in the NGO space. You know, we are more or less competing as opposed to complementing. You know, we are literally fighting, duplicating efforts. You know, again, that's another gray area in my view. But of course, suffice to say, at some point, government, you know, saw the need to address this aspect. You know, speaking to the aspect of the NGO Act, you know, part of it, the idea was to coordinate to ensure that there's no this confusion, for lack of a better term. But of course, it's just on paper. In terms of implementation, it's neither here nor there. You know, so again, that's another concern in my view, that we are not coordinating, we are competing instead. So it's something that also we need to give it the due attention. I submit. Over.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. On the aspect of sustainability, so the question on the table, how can we ensure, there's two questions, sustainability and coordination. How can we ensure that the things that we are doing are sustainable? These frameworks are not going away today, tomorrow. We need to figure out how we ensure that we can work together, and that the things what we're doing are impactful, the things that we're doing are sustainable. Any takers who wants to reflect on this question? Mhm. Any takers before I volunteer some people? Mhm. Welcome, Winford. Okay. Let me see. Is there anybody working in who was the person that talked about working in productivity area? It was a lady's voice early on when we started. To reflect on sustainability. I have some thoughts that I want to share, but I want to hear from other people as well. Bernard. Oh, as they say in the West. Bernard, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Yes, Mr. Here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right.
Yes, I wanted. It's quite a very good and interesting topic this afternoon about the developmental aspect. But however, how do we enhance that? Because I look at it in this aspect that if at local level, like country level, if we have failed to penetrate to that extent in terms of M&A, how possible is it that on the international market we can penetrate for us to come up with such humongous developmental template? Because I speak in an instance where we most of the times, like the field where I actually do the M&A, we receive a little bit of some resistance in the aspect that most of the yes, usually I do crops and animal M&A. So in most cases, you find that in most cases you have means of verification, but immediately when these people know that you'll be on the ground, some of them will be actually hiding or will be playing with numbers, whereby even now making a very good M&A report becomes a little bit difficult, or it will be based on what they were giving. It's like it will be biased. So now, my main concern
they're
is
cooking the numbers.
Yes, they are cooking the numbers to think that everything is okay, but in the actual sense, it's not. So now I was trying to find out to say, like, when we talk about M&D, most of the people, they don't look at the end result of having M&D, but they look at it to say, in the context where I would say it's like you're doing some investigation, or maybe you want someone to be fired. In that aspect, like in our local language here I would say shushu aspect, where you are trying to monitor them and see to it that maybe you want to make them fail in one or the other. So how do we as M&D practitioner penetrate on the national level locally, so that it will have impact on the international level when it comes to development? I submit.
All right, excellent. Let me just try. I'll come back to all the questions on sustainability and other things, but also how you build the culture for M&E. Let me just ask a simple question. How do you say M&E in a local language? Anybody want to volunteer? Monitoring and evaluation in the local language. Any language of your choice. Bemba, Chewa, Mbunda, Tumbuka, Euphrasia?
Thank you.
Madam Euphrasia Njovu, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've taken a little time to chat with the community about M&E, just to make sure that they understand what M&E is all about, and also how to monitor local programs by themselves as we try to encourage sustainability. So M&E, I'm currently working in Southern Province. So M&E itself may not have a particular single word in a language, but using the existing description of some situations, we've been able to just tell people what
Be able to
M&E
communicate.
is. Exactly. So in
Because language matters, right?
Yes, yes.
So tell us, how do you say it in Tonga?
Kulingula.
Kulingula.
Yeah, kulingula meaning it's like someone goes to the field and checking how their crop is growing. So when you ask them, they'll tell you, "Ndali kumunda kulingula," like I went to check on what is happening. So the word
Kulingula
itself, kulingula, will tell us what exactly this
sometimes
person
I
went to.
find that my Sisutu replaces my Tonga or my little Tonga. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that is how we've tried to bring
communicate.
the relevance of M&E in the program. Thank you.
Yes. In Bemba, you might say Ukuchenchenta. The town ones will just say Ukuchekinga. That's town Bemba or Ukuchekinga in Chinyanja. But I think part of what we need to do, and somebody could take this up as their own project, is to localize our languages for the kind of things for the concepts that we discuss. For the same goal, aiming for the goal of the reason we do this is that it's necessary. What doesn't get measured doesn't get monitored. What doesn't get monitored, you will not know if it gets achieved. We have a lot of justification for why we do M&E. Somebody talked about the aspect of how do I ensure that what I'm doing is not seen as, policing other people or things like that. That's where the culture, I do a whole different lecture on establishing a culture for M&E, so leadership and culture for monitoring and evaluation, meaning you need to, within an organization, there are practical things that you can do to ensure that everybody, number one, participates. Right from the beginning, from the data collection, from the analysis, let the people also start to see their own program. Let it becomes part inbuilt, part and parcel of their work. In the community, we do things like community-led monitoring, meaning the communities go to ask. You have billboards in agriculture where you can indicate these are the yields that we are targeting this year. This is what we're trying to achieve. In my early years, I used to support an organization called Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, CSPR, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction. I hope they're still running. And so what we used to do was we would take the national budget when it comes out, because it was activity-based budgeting. We'd take that budget and then go to the communities. And in each community, we would take all the different elements that were in the budget and say, in this sector, in the agricultural sector, in the environmental sector, in the education sector, these are the deliverables that relate to our district, that relate to our communities. We're supposed to deliver X number of desks to this school. And so we establish a system, which is a community-led monitoring, where the community themselves, they print this out and say, this year we are expecting these things to happen. And then we agree, every quarter, you have a meeting with the Ministry of Education in that district. Where are our desks? They are in the budget, but they haven't been delivered. That pushes that ministry to push their higher-ups, their HQs, their procurements, so those things can be delivered to that district. For the overall goal of that the budget execution happens locally and it's seen locally. Yes. Now, that takes us back to the aspects of sustainability. How do we ensure that these things are sustainable? Ultimately, the ultimate sustainability will have to be worked throughout the government systems that are in place, meaning the government ministries, the government departments. We have a department for every single area of human endeavor, if you will put it that way. We have a government for ministry department for health, for food, for agriculture, for climate, for roads, for everything that relates to. There are four things basically that we really look at. If you look at everything else we talk about in development, really every community is supposed to have um, their own. Every community is supposed to have an education, a point for education, a school, a university, college, whatever. They're supposed to have a health center. They're supposed to have access to a market, shops where they can sell their products. They're supposed to and buy products. They're supposed to have access to financing. So at the end of the day, for us to build resilient communities, develop our communities, that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to ensure that our communities have the basics met: education, health, access to markets and produce, and access to financing. And we're doing all of these other things. There's so much noise, there's so much work, and a lot of this. But if you keep those things clear in your mind, you are able to implement a government. You can run a government and say, these are the things that I should ensure that they happen. So when we talk about sustainability, we already have mechanisms in our governments, in our education, in our finance, whatever, that we should always work with. I've been privileged with the work I do, that everything we do, all our NGOs have to talk to the ministry. They have to have a memorandum of understanding with their relevant ministry, because that's where everything ends up. And we agree so many years you will transfer this to that ministry. It's a lot of money for countries to pick up. Our program here is about 80-something million dollars when you add everything up every single year. That for one ministry, they would not be able to budget that for sustainability, but they can sustain the impacts, and they can sustain some of the human resources and the systems that you develop. They will not be able to employ every single person that we've been able to employ. And so that's the aspect for sustainability. And so I like to talk to especially people who work in the government. But even if you're working for an NGO or a multilateral, bilateral organization, always think your country first, and think, what I'm doing, how does it help? How does it make it more sustainable? And right now, within the different ministries, so first of all, like in the Ministry of Finance, you have like a donor coordination section, somebody who coordinates donor funding and how the funds come and where they go. That's a very helpful and critical place. Then in each ministry also, right now I know Dr. George Sinyangwa, I hope he still is the PS for donor coordination at the Ministry of Health. And his role is really because there's so much resources coming into the country. For a country like Zambia, it's more than $1 billion every 2 years, right? It's a lot of resources, but do they go to the right places? So that office becomes critical to push the donors to put the money in the right places, to always say, sorry, we're not going to sign off on this. You don't put money here. Our big issue right now is this. This is where the money should go. And like I said yesterday, there's more than enough resources to solve some of the major issues, challenges that we have at household level, at community level. All right. Let's see. Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Just looking through the lists and checking on the charts. Why are our African governments failing to meet the targets or goals even when we have these clear frameworks? For example, we had a summit organized by the AU under Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, CAADP. The AU Commissioner on Agriculture clearly indicated that we are far in achieving the goals on food security among African states. So yeah, food is a basic need, a basic requirement, and we have indicators for getting to some of these targets in order to be able to provide. But to develop a nation, you can look at everything. We have some economists, and what it comes down to at the end of the day is productivity. If you are not producing, you can receive as much food, through the tough times. But if we don't improve our productivity, you don't go anywhere. There's no country that's going to improve unless you improve your productivity. Different countries do different things. Some do subsidies for their farmers. They sell some, but for the local consumption, they've got to do that. That's where the government money goes. That's where it should go, is to ensure that that productivity stays and figure out our systems. We still, Africa specific, we still have challenges with our monocrops like maize, which is, we've tried to make subsistence farmers grow maize. And it's something that has been proven over and over and over and over as not sustainable. There's nobody who's going to be able to grow maize on their own commercially and be successful. South Africa here, I drive quite a lot. Thousands of kilometers are around the country. Like even where I just live, there are Free State, we crisscrossed the Free State. There are farms that are, you just keep driving for kilometers and kilometers. Now, those farmers are part of systems. Each farmer will tell you, and when you sit down with every one of those farmers, they will tell you, look here, there's a bank. I go to Standard Bank. I go to this bank. I don't even buy my own inputs. The company that provides the inputs comes to me and says, look here, this is your farm. This is how much rainfall you're going to get this year in this area because obviously meteorology has improved. This is how much rain you're going to get this year. So they check down and they tell me exactly. And they give me the seed for this year that is exactly for that. And when I plant the maize, when I plant the whatever, the corn, the potatoes, sweet potatoes, whatever, when I plant, the day I'm planting, the company that is going to buy my products already buys them the day I'm planting, because there's an assurance of how much I'm going to produce. I'm getting the right inputs. I know how much rain I'm going to get this year. They will come and buy. ShopRite will come and buy and say, okay, this section here, all your fruits we have bought. This section here, all I have to do is deliver them. I don't even get paid. The bank where I got the loan pays that company where I got the inputs, and then they just give me the change, and the next year I repeat. They have established a system that can deliver on those goals. We haven't yet gotten to that place where we can establish these systems. You cannot do that with subsistence farmers. They are not in that system where they can receive funding from banks and be assured that they will deliver at that right place. And so we need to rethink that whole, paradigm of how we produce for our local consumption. It has to be at a different level. You need to go at a commercial level and produce to feed the country. Subsistence farmers can produce a little bit for just feeding, but for the overall goal, you cannot do it at that level. We've tried this for as long as I've been alive. I told my parents, stop growing maize. The amount of money I send you to grow maize, I can buy you milli meal for the whole year with the same money I'm paying for fertilizer, for weeding, for whatever. Why? Because they just don't have the capacity to produce it commercially. And that's one of the challenges. I know I've spent a little bit of time here, but that's one of the challenges we have for that particular food example that you were talking about. Yeah. And, the frameworks might help us, but we need to implement, to reflect on them and implement them at our local level correctly. You always have to localize. You always have to contextualize, because the context is always different in different countries. Okay. And that's where these coordinating units come in. All right. Any other question? Or any other comments, addition? Do you have a burning question on M&E in general in your organization? Okay, so for the remainder of the next session, we will go into some more of this planning for international development frameworks. There's some areas, if I feel like they're repeating, they might be good for your slides to read, but I'll skip because I like to talk with an idea and finish it off. Sometimes I cover slides that are up ahead. But when you're thinking about planning international development frameworks, it's really the same things that you do, like we said yesterday, with the local frameworks. Okay, you still have to have clearly defined goals and objectives. You can't run away from this. It doesn't matter at which level you're working. They guide you, they give you a focus, they help you measure progress, they help you know where exactly you should put the resources, they help you to be able to communicate what it is you're doing, they help you to share accountability. So this is standard M&E stuff. I always just throw in this because every time you give an M&E class or an M&E talk, and you haven't talked about SMART objectives, people feel like they're about to faint. So anyway, just in case you're new, we always talk about M&E objectives and goals that they have to be specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant. Some people say, oh, the T is not here, it's supposed to be in the middle, and time bound, okay? So all the time, we always talk about MDGs up to 2015, there was 2014, 2015, 2030, 595 goals, now we are at 2030. Environmental goals, now we are at, most everything now is at 2030, yes. And these are some of the reasons why we always emphasize that everything has to be smart. Okay. For M&E, it's the only way to go because that's how we are able to measure and report if everything is smart. What are some of the steps? I mentioned earlier that, you know, as USA Lesotho, we are working on some new awards and we put out something called request for information first, and partners send in their questions, and then we'll put in a request for proposals, an RFP. Partners send in their they send in their proposals, and sometimes we, you know, but we go through this whole process. But before we do that, we do quite a bit of analysis. So we do some co-creation work, we do some specific analysis like gender analysis, we do all of that. In short, developmental frameworks also follow the program cycle, same as everything else. You do a needs assessment and analysis. You do strategic planning, meaning you do all this thinking, your conceptual framework, your results. You go through all of that. But you've got to know where the money is coming from, and you've got to raise your money. And, you know, money comes from different places. Some of our awards are fully funded, like they are US government funded. Some of our awards will be partly. We actually do quite a bit of fundraising in between from other sources. So you'll have private sector organizations, and they will contribute as well. We fund organizations like the UN, UNICEF, because mostly the UN bodies don't have their own money. Money comes from donors, okay, compared to the bilateral, so the multilaterals. The bilateral, the money comes from their governments, so you see from the Japanese people. But with the bilateral or with the multilaterals, they have to raise money from somewhere. So if you work for good if you want to work for the UN, but just know that you'll be writing some proposals, you'll be raising funds, you'll be expected to, if you don't like to do that, that might not work very well for you. We're always working on something. I have a proposal I need to write and make sure it's in by February next year for some private sector funding. Okay, so we are always doing this. We are always resource mobilizing, but we are raising those resources based on our framework that we've already designed. Okay, and then we do implementation and monitoring and evaluation, and then we do some implementation and monitoring, and then review and evaluation. The other week, our senior SI advisor asked and said, yeah, can we do some evaluations for some of our programs? So you see, PEPFAR was set up as an emergency program. That's why it's called the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It was set up as an emergency program, meaning that the funds were just supposed to go out and do stuff. We didn't do baseline surveys. We didn't do midterm evaluations. We didn't do any end up to now. We don't do baseline surveys. We don't do midterm evaluation. Don't do end term evaluations. Just because of how the program was set up. But we still do quite a lot of monitoring. So we focused more on the monitoring aspect. When I started doing M&E, evaluation was the thing that people thought was the best thing. Like monitoring is nothing. Evaluation is it. That's the one that you have to do. Do it right, do it correctly. But you know what we realized is with the work especially that we're doing with monitoring and the amount of data that we've been able to collect, we've got tools now. We've got tablets now. You can collect data on your phone. You can put laptops in every health facility. You can put 5 laptops and desktops in every farmer. You can give farmers tablets. You can give them phones. You can give them apps and things. So the amount of data you collect from monitoring is just overabundant. And you're collecting so much more data now that you can analyze it the way you do an evaluation. It doesn't say that we shouldn't do evaluation. It doesn't say evaluation is less than monitoring. I'm just saying the amount of data now that we're able to do at this point, can equal what you can do in an evaluation. But evaluations are still critical for learning whether what you did actually made a difference. Instead, what we end up doing is we do in health, it will be something like an incident survey. Or you do a demographic health survey. And then that gives you incidence prevalence survey or whatever. And that gives you the same impact figures that you would get out of an evaluation and answer your question. So development frameworks also follow the same program cycle. There's a lot of, at the beginning, planning, thinking, monitoring, and then evaluation. Somebody in the question was asking about what they found. So, I don't know if the data came from an evaluation study or they come from monitoring. But at the end of the day, what they did find was that they were not having the impact they were looking for, okay? So we tend to do the same thing even with our programming and our studies, at that level, for us to know whether it's making a difference or not. Let me talk about needs assessment specifically, but this also relates to research. But a lot of what happens at the beginning before you implement the program. So you do quite a bit of data collection, stakeholder consultation. You use some modeling, if we do ABCD, this is what it will lead to. We have things like an estimates analysis too, where we put in all the numbers and it models out for you. It's if we do ABCD, if we do this activity, if we reach X number of farmers, our productivity will go up this much. So you do all of that analysis, so that's where all the other skills might come in. It might be economics. It might be looking at the cultural factors and everything. You put them in a model. With that modeling, I think I gave the example of circumcision. We model and say, if you circumcise X number, 70% of the population of the males, and do ABCD, how much does the incidence reduce by? And put in all these numbers based on studies, based on research. Okay. There's a lot of documentation existing and other initiatives that are going on. In short, you don't have to remake the wheel. You can always look at what's already been done. Okay, you have to make these decisions about doing some quantitative, some qualitative, and a mix, some focus group discussions, and do all of that. internally, and it's amazing how much we do quite a bit of this. So when I talked about this proposal that I'm working on for some funding, the things that we've been doing, I have a worksheet, I have a document where everybody's typing in and we do, but we also meet to just brainstorm. This is where you do your SWOT analysis, where you take your problem and convert it to an opportunity and say, okay, this is a challenge. Now, can we identify what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and strengths are? Or you might do trend analysis. Again, we have another activity we are working on right now, because what we have noticed is that even though there's been so much improvement in the HIV sector, and we've reached such big goals, Lesotho, for example, has one of the highest child mortality rates. So we're talking about neonatal rates, some of the highest maternal deaths. Why would that be? When we're doing such a good job with the other programs. So we've been doing some trend analysis and looking at data from, as far back as we can look and see what is it that has changed. I already talked about doing community input. We have another organization right now doing a market analysis for our private sector initiative. And they're working on a market analysis to see, and they're in the country right now talking to people and seeing where would these products go, who would buy what, and things like that. So these are practical things that we actually do every single day, every single year. Environmental scans, all of that is always happening. We've touched on this quite a bit. Maybe I'll highlight just on stakeholder engagement. Back in the day, we focused quite a bit on participatory techniques, and over time, some of them have died off. Focus group discussion, semi-structured interviews. We used to do quite a bit of that. So that helps you to get responses very quickly from the community, so you don't have to wait to do like a whole research. Local expertise utilization is also very important. There are people in the communities who know much more about what it is you want to implement. Local expertise utilization also means talk to people in the government, talk to expertise in the ministry. They probably know more about the program than you will ever know. They know things that they've tried and failed. They'll tell you this, we tried already. You're insisting on building another database. We've already done this before. And this is what it hasn't worked very well. One of the first things we do is ensure we have a local steering committee. So the framework might be international, funding might be up there, but at implementation, we always establish a local steering committee. I need to look at, for the ABC, activity-based costing, I need to put together a local steering committee to involve people from Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Community Development, and other ministries. We put them together. We have a steering committee. The idea is that you don't do things that are not beneficial. They will be able to say, this works, this doesn't work. They'll provide input. Local leaders also are included in that. Someone mentioned capacity building. We've had quite good success in building capacity of local partners, like, identify what are their needs, where do they require improvement, and then improve their capacity in those areas. And then they're able to get their own funding. They're able to manage their own funding. A number of them are now managing our funding. So right now, as USAID, our biggest partner now, who gets the most funding. I think they're getting, I don't know, totally maybe 20 million or so. They are a local partner. So that means we're making progress in those areas. But we've been building capacity for this for a long time. I've been touching on this for resource mobilization, grant writing, proposal development, diversification of funding sources. The only thing I would highlight here is public-private partnerships. They're not very easy. We've tried them in many areas, and sometimes we've struggled. But we do have one where that's working very well, where we have a public-private partnership, and local private pharmacies in this case. As you know, traditionally, especially in the HIV area, all the drugs are given through government institutions, and the local pharmacies don't participate. And yet, you can go and buy cancer medication from clinics, or I can't remember what it's called in Zambia, the pharmacy. Anyway, you can go and buy those kinds of medication, really strong medications. And now we're looking at sustainability and saying, what happens when these programs end? We need the private players to also start playing. And so we have over 20 pharmacies that are now participating, and they receive the drugs they give to their clients. And hopefully that will continue to build into more sustainable things. There are resource matching programs, where we say we'll contribute this, the government will contribute this. There are in-kind contributions from some of those. And there are all these new things these days, like crowdfunding and community fundraising, that help to mobilize, to implement, so that's kind of how it works in practice. Okay, not just the theoretical aspect of how this frameworks, but that's what we do in practice. Another important aspect is that we need to link the national development plan. We need to link with the national development plans. So with the last session that you had, I think you covered this quite extensively. That's why haven't gone too much into it. But this is an important aspect. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. So previously we had MDGs that we used to, then they transitioned into SDGs. Those SDGs have to be reflected. So when we are designing like 7th National Development Plan or 8th National Development Plan, sometimes we just lift the goals from SDGs to there. And then we take them into, once we have the National Development Plans, then we go into the sector-specific strategic plans. So you can see that this one for health, 2022 to 2026. The 8th National Development Plan ends in 2029, and sometimes they are not the same dates. I can't remember if SDG is 2030. Yes. Now, back in the day, and you can see, sometimes I forget that this is 2005. I used to write these reports. So I did this report. I wrote a few MDG reports back in the day, and the principles have remained the same, which summarize from a larger thing. And back in the day, I used to be, I obviously growing older, young people, this is your show now. I had so much energy. I would write the report, collect the data, analyze, take it to the printer, and then go and deliver the documents at UNDP. But the principles haven't changed. What we used to do here, we're still doing here. We still take those elements here, and then we take them into the national strategic plans. So if your role is here, you need to make sure you read what is in here. If your role is here, the first thing you do is see what are the relevant international development frameworks that relate to the National Development Plan. You're always looking back and seeing what's relevant. The advantage is that there's already standardized language here that you can lift. There's already standardized targets that are applicable. There's already conceptual frameworks that have already been lifted. All you're doing now is applying them to your, X number of districts, etc., 100 districts, etc. Yeah. So that's kind of how it works. Some of the consideration that you're making, you align the priorities. Yes, the human challenges, like I've been saying, are not so complicated in terms of definition, right? The things I'm talking about, health, education, food, shelter, etc. They are pretty much the same. And all you're doing is aligning. And then you incorporate your national policies, your laws, your whatever is set up in the country, and ensure there's ownership, there's leadership. It's being done locally. Don't just get some consultant to come and do everything and then they disappear. That's where the sustainability dies. Adaptation to local context. And then ensure that the targets are very specific. The indicators from the international framework might be, millions of people, A, B, C, D. At the National Development Plan, you are bringing it down to the country level. And you have to know what the population is in the area that you're targeting, and you break it down like that. So pretty much that's how it's working most of the time. Okay. I'll close out with this aspect, and then we will be done for the day. So just going back to kind of where we started from. All right. And please let me know if somebody is checking to see if there are any questions or comments. So we go back to where we started from. When you are planning, you need to plan for strong monitoring and evaluation of the development frameworks. So all the objectives, the baseline data collection, the stakeholder involvement. I just been talking about the use of technology. Now we have all sorts of things we can do. The building the local capacity. We need to train people in monitoring and evaluation. If your office is struggling with understanding the role of an M&E specialist, why don't you do this? Call Zamia and ask them and say, can you come to my office and give us a session? Send us some specialists to come and train the whole office. I think that's what the lady did I talked about, I did a training at the Post newspaper back in the day when they were still running. It's a newspaper. But the lady who was running the M&D department felt like they didn't understand, not everybody understood what was going on. And the Post editor, chief editor back then attended the class and looked at me, and we share a similar name. And they looked at me and says, Membe, are you sure this is not just dancing to the donors' tunes? That's why we're doing this. And so we had to kind of explain this concept that actually what the donors did was just put in words what we've always done in the past. In the past, we've always wanted to know, is what I'm doing working? The what if, the so what is, we always want to know, is what I'm doing working? Did it work? Every time you do something, you always ask, how well did I do? And so we call it monitoring and evaluation in the development field, but we do it all the time in every sector. Try staying at a hotel. I've been running a couple of Airbnbs for a long time. And every time people stay, they leave feedback. Okay, what is that? That's data collection. That's evaluation. That's systems. Every time people give some kind of feedback, you're collecting data to improve and we take that data and we make decisions about how we improve the way we do business. It's the same principle that applies at any level of frameworks, including international development frameworks. The four horsemen I've been singing about, so I want to sing the song again. If you want to be serious about your M&E as a practice, as a career, if you want to go far, as an M&E specialist, as an advisor, in your career, this is what I'll tell you. If you have an interview next week, this is what you need to do. You need to be able to show that you know how to collect data. I can collect qualitative data. I can collect quantitative data. I know how to do, if I'm collecting quantitative data, I know how to do questionnaires. I know how to do sampling. I know how to do, if I'm collecting qualitative data, I know how to do, we don't call them questionnaire. What do we call them? I'm forgetting this. Okay, I know how to do the document for collecting qualitative data. What do we call those things again? If somebody can remember, type it in the chat. But anyway, I know how to do those frames for collecting qualitative data, and we call them tools. And I know how to establish, I know how to go about, do the collection, and then do the analysis and write up. I know how to store data. I like to tell people that as an M&E specialist, as you grow in your career, you might not be the one doing this, but you should be able to know what they are doing. Okay, you may not be the one doing the sampling, but you should be able to describe to the statistician, do sampling like this. I know how to store the data. We used to say, start with your paper or whatever. No, skip the paper, just go straight to Excel, just go straight to electronic, just put it in a system. You will save countless hours. I know how to do analysis. I know how to summarize. I know how to do the basic stuff. I know how to disseminate. I know how to do long, short. I know how to write reports. I know how to write big reports. I know how to write short stories. I know how to write case studies. When I'm interviewing people, I just ask them around these questions. If they know how to do this, then they can establish a strong monitoring and evaluation for the development framework. Now, we do this at the local level. It's the same thing we do at the international level. We are collecting data in our program, mostly monitoring data. We are storing data. Now we have complex systems. We are pulling data in DHIS2. It automatically goes into other systems at the international level. Other people are working on just the analysis bits, and then we get dashboards for dissemination. And all of that is happening. And I'm able to articulate that because I've gone through this process, over time. And it's always these same things that you're doing. Some people do more of this, some people do more of that, some people do more of this, some people do more of that. In any ministry that you're working, Ministry of Finance, you are doing the same thing. You get your framework, you get your 8 NDP. What are you going to do to know that the 8th National Development Plan is working? First thing is you're going to have to collect data from each one of the ministries. You give them templates. Guys, every quarter, I want a report. Guys, every quarter, I want you to send me these stories. Every quarter, I want you to send me this. Then you will store it somewhere. Then you will analyze it. Then you'll be able to share with the country, with the Ministry of Finance, and say, this is how well we are doing on each one of our indicators in the 8 NDP. So it works the same way. So you need to establish strong monitoring and evaluation systems for your frameworks. Okay, if you cannot grasp this particular slide, then that's where you need to start from. Do your one-on-one. For those of you who were not here yesterday, I have a little description of this in a LinkedIn article. If you're on LinkedIn, just search and see the articles. And I don't have a lot of articles there, but I only have like a few because this is one of the important ones that establishes kind of everything that we do, in a snapshot. And okay, so yeah, I've been talking a lot, so I've covered all of these: periodic data collection, qualitative, quantitative, feedback mechanism, real-time monitoring. You can do impact assessments. You build all of these in. When you describe this section here, that's your M&D plan. Okay, everybody who participates in this is your M&D system. Does that sound simple? It's very simple. Okay. The learning side of things helps us to do more adaptive management and approach. It helps us to do more reflection. It helps us to do mid-course corrections. It helps us to do these, I was talking about scenarios, we say, you can put data into a system and it tells you, if we do here, this will happen. If we do here, this will happen. Let me give you a very quick example with PEPFAR. When we started to implement PEPFAR and we had a number of ambassadors, then a lady called Deborah Burks, Ambassador Burks, when she joined PEPFAR, she looked at the numbers. She looked at how well the program was going. She said, we've been doing this for a long time. We should have made more progress by now. She looked at how much money we were getting. It was multi-millions of dollars, way too much money, and we weren't putting them in the right place. Now, this is a secret for the person who asked the question, why is it that we are struggling with some of the things we are doing in Africa? And we're not getting the results that we need to get. Now, listen to this carefully, because that's where the big secret is. You've got to look at the data. And she just pushed M&E to the front. And I was right in the middle of that. And that was so very exciting for me to see somebody who understood the role that data can play. Some people felt the pain, like it was too much. We were counting, being counting, as people say. But for me, it was exciting to see us actually being able to do that and make course corrections in the middle. So this is what she did. Her first meeting, she said, guys, I'm going to introduce a rule called 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule, some of you may have heard of this, that 20% of your results, 80% of your results come out of 20% of your actions. You can apply this to your life. When you wake up every day, the whole week, the whole year, 80% of your money comes from 20% of your efforts. You're doing all sorts of other things, but 80% of what you get comes from 20% of your efforts. And it's called the Pareto principle. Those of you who've been economists or whatever, you've been learning this. And so you can apply the same principle to a program. And so she looked at the data. Number one, the way our program is set up, we are going everywhere, doing everything and not achieving much. Let's flip it. We're going to focus on 20% of the health facilities that give us 80% of the results. People screamed, people cried. There are people with HIV everywhere you look. Every country has so many. She says, no, you're going to move out of those sites. You're only going to focus in 20% of the sites. Doesn't sound equitable, but she was right once you look at the data. So when we took the data and we start to look at the data, and then we realized, look here, actually, for most countries, it balanced out to like 30, 70%, 30 or 35, 65. But you could see the big difference that just by focusing on 30% of your program, we were reaching 80% of the. So now we were able to do much more in those 30% of the sites. And then just do a light touch in the other sites, not leave them out completely, but just do a light touch. But here we focus because that's where the bulk of the population was coming. And you could see the accelerated difference that it made. Why? Because we're doing monitoring and evaluation and learning and adapting as we go. We shifted our programs. People cried, people complained. We had to fire people in some places to move people in some places. And we've been doing that the whole time. Every time we learn something and say, this is where we need to shift to. We change, we stop doing some things. We move to where we make mid-course corrections. We learn, we reflect. We do these scenarios and say, if we just focus here, where does it take us? Okay. And then you're always planning and changing and pushing. And of course, there's the risk management as well, because if you move out of those, 20%, you can apply it in your business and see, where am I spending the most time? And actually, where is my most money coming from? A lot of people have gone into farming in Zambia and doing chickens, pigs, and doing all sorts of things, right? And what most people tend to learn in the end is that their job is still the one that's still giving them the most money compared to all the other things they're doing where they're actually spending more money. Not to discourage entrepreneurship, but you always have to reflect and say, of course, you can plan up ahead and say, if I improve in all these areas, am I going to get more? But you always need to be realistic and look at the data and say, where am I getting most of my money and where am I spending? The second part of this deals with the budget. Once she ended up doing that, then she went to the money and said, look here, we are not even able to spend all this money that we keep receiving every year. So what I'm going to do now, going forward, you spend the money for that particular year. If you don't spend it, it goes away. Next year, I'm not giving you any more until you finish the money you got last time. We made corrections, but it was based on the data. It was based on by looking. It was based on monitoring and evaluation and learning. So that's how we practically implement, plan, execute, and implement global frameworks. And we've come to learn that you know, even through the evolving of things will change, things will move forward, things will change. But the basic core principles, they still remain the same. So, as we say in Sisutu, Bomele Wondate, Kialewoha Ahulu. My lousy peeps might be able to understand that. It just means thank you very much. So I truly appreciate. Thank you to the team. Now we'll take a few questions and any comments on what we have shared this afternoon, hopefully in the next 15 or so minutes, and then we'll close out. So let's look at the charts. Mr. Kayeye, thank you very much. Ms. Njovu. All right, Ms. Mukwavi, how are you? Okay, so let's hear any questions, any reflections from the things you've been implementing, any questions that you may have. Since this is the last session, you can take any questions. Don't feel shy to say I've been doing it wrong. It's all right. We all start from somewhere. Okay. All right. I don't see any hands. Let me see. Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, we could stretch this for the next 3 hours, but we would be going through. I could teach this for 5 days and give you more and more and more. But I think for the context and for the items, I'd like to say, if I don't see any other questions or any other comments, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been able to attend. Those who have been able to attend both sessions, kudos to you. These are very long sessions, hearing the same person talking for forever. So I truly appreciate your time. Thanks to Zamia for continuing to do these upskilling exercises and to train. And I like to always invest in the next generation. And I have hope that, we have very talented, clever people who are going to take this and go forward. Some of us, will be thinking about retiring in the next few years or retiring from this, going to something else, or, different fashion of doing things. But the idea is to ensure that we leave space for others as they come up as well in this field. So I want to wish you all the best as you continue with this work. All the best to Zamia, and back to you. Over. Is Zamia able to hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Maybe just in terms of logistics, when are you able to share your slides so that we can share with the rest of the audience?
I'll share them this evening.
Okay.
Just after this, we can send them by email.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, on this end, we've been doing Thanksgiving as well. Happy Thanksgiving and compliments of the season. Hopefully we'll run into some of you as the holidays come up. Otherwise, see you next time. Bye.